and welcome to another edition of CloseMode, the enterprise sales show. And today we're all really lucky to be here with Matt Finch. Matt is VP of Sales Engineering at Olo, which is an open SaaS platform for restaurants that enables hospitality at every touch point. How was that, Matt? Did I do okay?
That was great. You nailed it. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah,
No more.
You mentioned about being lucky to have me on. It's definitely the other way around. I'm super privileged to be on this podcast that I listen a lot to.
Thank you. So
great to be here.
Well, we don't do enough on the human side of enterprise sales and that kind of thing. And you and I wandered into our kind of pre-call into something about balancing kind of physical and mental health with professional growth. And it's a subject that's near and dear to me. And many years ago, I read a quote, allegedly by Confucius. I just saw a meme the other day that said, "I didn't say any of that crap," and it was signed Confucius. But this one is alleged to him that we can be both poet and warrior, right? And that kind of changed because I felt like what you and I were talking about was that kind of out of balance between the poet and the warrior. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that we've had to grow into, especially over the course of the last couple of decades when technology has enabled us to be even more interconnected. We talk about work-life balance, but really I think it's more like a work-life integration these days. To use a tech word, but I think from the perspective of trying to understand how you bring the warrior and the poet together at the right time, at the right moment, I think is a really new skill for a lot of people. I also think remote working, no commute. How do you have that work-life integration when I'm here at home? I've got my family is outside of that door, right? And the ability to instantly switch from one character to another is not possible. And I also think we need to reflect on what type of character you bring to work and you then bring home. And we know we're all generally slightly different between the two, but we've got core tenets that we should really believe in as well. I also think technology, right? When I first started in sales 15 years ago, we didn't have Slack on our phones. We didn't have smartphones. We were just starting to get into having some kind of email on a phone, like a BlackBerry style thing. And the integration of the two worlds has just been incredible, to a point where I think we have to set healthy boundaries between the two as well, but they would need to be integrated, those two worlds, especially if you work in sales. Think about the traditional 9 to 5 of a seller, which would be commute to work, sit at the desk, grab a coffee, hit the phones, or whatever activity you have to do that day, run some meetings, maybe travel. 5 o'clock comes, you head home. During your commute, you get to decompress, listen to some music, listen to a podcast, to change your world, have that moment in time that's just for you on that commute on the way home. And then you can turn up and be the separate person, the different person, the poet in your personal time, and whether that's personal passions or family or whatever. And you have that separation, or we used to have that separation. And I think that separation has really started to blur. So I think we have to be proactive in knowing, owning, and deciding when we're each of those different roles, and bring the two together in an integration, as opposed to a firm balance that we may have had to have in previous lives.
It's so tricky. One of the things you mentioned when we were chatting about this was like people pleasing being a trap, and I connected that notion to this idea of the balance of kind of who we are. But tell me more about that. What's your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. And I think again, this is potentially something generational. When you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, your first year or two into a job, and you're trying to learn as much as you can. You're trying to impress the right people, climb the ladder, all of those kind of things. I think it's very easy to fall into this trap of kind of people pleasing and saying yes to everything that comes your way, and taking everything on your shoulders. Now, to a degree, that helps us learn what we're good at. That helps us learn what we should and shouldn't take on in the future. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But the thing that we were talking about, and the thing I think is really interesting, is what does people pleasing as a trap look like? People pleasing can be a good thing, I think, early on, but I think as you grow and mature and you want to expand your career overall, I think it can end up being a trap. And the thing for me around that is the growth of credibility and authenticity of yourself in any role. And I think if you fall into the trap of saying yes, trying to please everyone, not having your own perspective and opinion, and just agreeing with everybody else for the sake of it, I think it starts to erode your kind of social value in your place in the world, in the corporate world, because you end up being known as the person that just kind of says yes to everything, as opposed to having a different perspective. Sometimes being a contrarian is a good thing because it's your genuine opinion. And I found a lot of the times I've fallen into this trap myself a few times. So I speak really from experience, which is that I've had better results in situations when I've just believed and communicated what I authentically believe, as opposed to what I think someone else wants to hear.
Matt, you just said two things in there. One is the use of authentic, which is kind of, at least to me, maybe some people, their authentic self is all warrior and they need to balance out with some poet, but for me,
Yes.
my authentic self was the poet side that I had overridden. And you also talked about social value. Like, I love that notion. It's sort of like what came to mind as you use those two words is what is our brand? And is our brand, at what moment do you, and how much of that brand have you slammed away? I'll tell you a quick story, and I think you know this. Like, I grew up very lower blue collar, south side of Chicago. My dad ran a tavern. My mom was a housekeeper, classic sort of Polish housekeeper family. And, I loved motorcycles and muscle cars and water skiing. And there was a bunch of stuff that I kind of gave up. I think that was all the poet. And when I was given access to this white collar world, and you touched on some of this, it's like, holy smokes, I'm going to sort of shed that old skin, and I'm going all white collar. And a boss of mine, and still a good friend to this day, Roger Dow, said to me, and by the way, so at one point I ended up, like, I had this job. I still had a high school diploma. By the time I left the company, I had an MBA from Kellogg and an undergrad from DePaul. And Roger said to me, Brian, you need to balance that Kellogg MBA with that kid who grew up in the South Side. And I'm just wondering your perspective on that, because that is kind of the brand and what you said, the social value. And he was like, you ditched too much of that, man. Bring that fighter back.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that fits in with like a corporate construct expectation that we have from culture as well, from movies, from TV shows. It was funny when I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking, when was the last time I wore a suit and tie to work? First of all, I generally work from home, but when I'm traveling or when I'm going to see customers, wearing a suit and tie, that the physicality of that white collar versus blue collar construct, I think is really interesting. I'm the host and MC of our external events, so I was the host and MC of our customer conference in Palm Springs recently, Beyond 4, and I was on stage in a t-shirt and sneakers. Right, because if I was there in a suit and tie, I'd have been inappropriate for the audience. It wouldn't have been a fit. Now, I did have a blazer on with a pocket square. You kind of dress these things up a little bit, right? But I really think that's changed. And I think bringing the your whatever your true self is, whatever your background is, wherever you come from, and I also see more and more these days folks with visible tattoos, piercings, different hairstyles. And I love all of that, because it brings people's personality, as opposed to being the corporate, there you go, as opposed to being the corporate robot we were taught to be when you've got to polish your shoes, you got to tuck your shirt in, you got to wear a suit and tie, you've got to look like all of the other people in the office.
But we're not doing ourselves, and maybe more important, other people, any favors by doing that. Going back to what my boss said, right? Maybe we're leaving a super effective part of our business person by bringing that part of that human. And it's funny, you talked about suits. It goes right to suit of armor for me. When I put
Mm,
on
mm.
a suit these days, and you're right, Matt, we don't do it that much. When I put it on, I am going to battle for something.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you must have heard of the phrase "fake it till
Yeah.
you make it," right? You know that's one that we hear a lot, and it's one that's kind of encouraged as part of career growth. And I do believe in this to a
Hmm.
degree. Fake it till you make it to me is like, go for the job that you want, try it out, fake it until you make it, because you'll learn on the job, you'll achieve something, and then you'll learn how to do it, and you'll be able to get
Yeah.
through that kind of fake period and be successful. And if we don't take these risks in life, then we'll never put ourselves in an uncomfortable position to grow. So overall, I think it's a good thing. The challenge with fake it till you make it is that ends up with kind of like crippling imposter syndrome, and you end up,
Yeah.
if you're trying to constantly be someone
Yeah.
else and you never let your authentic self catch up, then you're constantly going to be living in a world that isn't you, and isn't the true you that you want to, that brings all of those
It's
benefits
it's
to
it's
that
so
role as
interesting that
well.
you say that, because I literally, when you talked about fake it till you make it, I wrote down imposter syndrome. And for
Right.
those who aren't familiar with it, and I'm interested in how you see it, I see it as, I'm kind of full of crap. Like, I don't belong in this room, and I've been there, given where I came from, sitting as a VP and wearing my suit of armor, and especially before I got minted with the higher education. I was like, Everybody knows, and I'm going to get busted at some moment. Someone's going to figure out this is all bullshit. Like, everything that I've done is it right. How would you talk about
Yeah,
imposter syndrome?
yeah. My goodness, 100%. I mean, I don't have a college degree. I finished what's called A levels in the UK, which is kind of the equivalent like an associate's degree. But anyways, it's a different
Yeah.
system. But every single day, I worry that someone's going to come along and say, "Well, you didn't go to
Yes.
school, so like, how come you're here?" And I've really learned to grow into that, which is kind of when I'm in a role and it's going well, I'm looking at my immediate results. Like, it doesn't matter about the background, it doesn't matter about
Yes.
the education. And it's often funny how people take different paths to get there, and college, not college, MBA, all sorts of different paths to get to, frankly, the same place. Like, hey, we're sat in this meeting room together. We both work at the same company. We're having this. It doesn't matter how we got
Correct.
there. We're
Yes.
here and we're performing. And we should judge each other and look at each other and help each other based on immediate relevant
Yeah.
results, especially in sales. That's so obvious, isn't it? Some of the best salespeople that I've ever worked with either don't have college degrees or they have college degrees in something entirely irrelevant. In fact, the very, very best one had a college degree in poetry, which is really interesting. How creative is that? And this concept of storytelling and all that kind of thing. Like, the place, the journey that we travel doesn't define the place that we're going, and the journey that we travel doesn't define the place and the results as to where we're at right now. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to be a corporate lawyer, if you want to be a surgeon, if you want to be, all sorts of jobs that require a degree, 100% is the right path to take.
Yeah.
And I fully encourage it. I'll be encouraging my kids to go to college as well. But it doesn't mean you're hamstrung by, I didn't do the normal path, so I can't go into a world I want to get into. There's always a way to get into the world that you want to get into, especially with the way technology in the world is these days. You can go and learn anything on YouTube, go and practice it, turn up and give it your best try. And I think that's more what we should lean into these days.
I love that, and I failed to remember that you and I spoke about education last time, and love the way you challenge the status quo. And I think it's having taught decision making in a past life. I mean, that's a heuristic people have for hiring people, right? And so I have a bias, and heuristics help, but oftentimes they cloud your decisions. And I think you're completely right. I mean, I've got someone in my family who is an unbelievable tech salesperson, and he's
Mm-hmm.
got a high school degree and hides that. And it's really sad, because yeah, and that was the thing. And now there's a lot of people getting those degrees saying, holy smokes, I spent all this money, and I can't, I can't even get the right job. So I think you're completely right to challenge that, and it does fit back to this notion of who is our authentic self, and who are we bringing
Mm,
to the table. And I
yeah.
wonder how you feel. um, if I can go back, I mean, I've been in business 25 years, but today I feel like this notion that you and I are talking about is not only more accepted, maybe even a little more encouraged. How would you react to that?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it is really encouraged, and I see more and more companies dropping the degree requirement, or at least having or equivalent experience. And I think that's really important for companies to recognise that folks can come from different paths and still be just as effective in the role. Now, of course, opening doors at the start of someone's career, that becomes difficult with or without the educational background, for sure. But I think that's something that, again, I'm seeing more and more companies open up roles for different paths into their organization. I'm definitely seeing that it's becoming more and more of a thing. Certainly in tech, I'm noticing as well, certain roles, especially in sales. I think there's a salesperson in
Yeah.
everyone, and just some of us end up turning
Yep.
professional. You can learn, perfect, practice, and get that skill to be at a professional level, at a pro level, and then turn up and have a wonderful career. It doesn't matter your background. And I think companies are definitely seeing that, especially in the sales world when we're so results driven. If you have proven results, if you climb the ladder in any sales organization, and then eventually you maybe make the switch to tech through selling something else first, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you come from. We're judging ourselves on the results that we've had previously and the way that we turn up every single day. So yeah, I see it more and more as being an accepting and changing world. And it speaks to diversity as well. It
Yes.
speaks to
Yes.
opportunity. It speaks to the way that people grow up, and can they afford to go to college? Do they have the wherewithal and the resources to be able to take that step? And some people's situations are very different, and not having the opportunity to even take those paths is a very common thing. That doesn't stop that person having the potential to being an amazing
Yeah.
salesperson or amazing sales engineer. And I think that's something that we're recognizing more and more.
Yeah, and it's now that there's limits to this, and you were talking about sort of the educational requirement. I also think like there's that old saying out there about let your freak flag fly,
Mm,
and I think within limits, of course. Too much of a freak will scare people off, but I think a lot of us have some kind of freak flag in there, and I think letting it rip, not only internally, as you say, what back to your social value, what is your brand, what's most authentic about you,
mm,
internally, I
mm.
think that can help. I also think it can help with customers. Show me, don't be a
Yes,
robot. Show me a little bit. Like I think
yes,
there's a certain vulnerability that comes with letting your freak flag peek out a little bit. Maybe it's not a massive flag, but
yes.
enough to let people know who the hell you are. Yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I think customers in particular value authenticity. If you turn up with the suit and the watch and the car and all of these cliches we see with kind of corporate life and tech and sales world, tech sales, that kind of thing, it already drives a wedge between that relationship. And I think turning up with your authentic self with customers is probably the most valuable thing you can do, because that relationship is entirely built on trust. And if you can trust, connect, relate to, it's really interesting the world I'm in right now with Olo, which is selling to restaurants. Restaurants is, of course, incredibly
Yeah.
diverse. Think about the folks that have, started in a food truck and then have a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire with hundreds, if not thousands, of locations across the world. You know, think about the person that started that food truck and what they needed to do to get that off the ground, and the background they had and where they learned their skills. And then we then turn up as these kind of tech sellers. We have to turn up as people that are incredibly authentic and passionate about what we do, because that's exactly what the folks that we're selling to are. I mean, they are incredibly passionate about their restaurant brand, about hospitality, about the food that they create, the experiences that they
Yep.
create for their customers. And if we turn up and don't match that type of truth and energy and authenticity, we don't get very far. And I think that's something we've recognized at Olo, is we have an incredibly diverse and rich group of sellers and customer success people within our organization, because we really need them to be. If we were all polished corporate robots, we actually wouldn't have great relationships with these really wonderful restaurateurs and hospitality folks that we deal with every single day.
Yeah, I wonder too. I feel like it's more generational, the need to fit in, and maybe the subject you and I are having
Mm,
or talking about has less to do with a 26-year-old than somebody of a certain generation? Like,
Mhm.
do you think it's generational, or do you think the younger people entering the workforce are feeling this as much?
Yeah, I think I think the way that I really connect with with this topic is think about 10 years ago when the phrase millennial was almost used as a
Yes.
derogatory term. It was, it was a newer generation of folks that were coming into the world with a different perspective. They've been through a whole different world to get to where they are. They were the first generation having, technology at their fingertips. They were born at the same time as the internet and grew with that, right? Very different thing. The millennial, I think 10 years ago was almost used as some kind of derogatory term. Now that generation are becoming middle, if not senior managers and leaders within organizations. And I think that's what's really fascinating to me is that the world is changing with the generations that have sticking with their authentic self and how
Yeah.
they've grown up. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. I think I also think there's a huge element of learning and growing and maturing, and the wonderful, crazy, amazing ideas we have at 22, we think then at 42 and think, wow, that was kind of crazy. Some people are hanging on to that, and other people, we kind of mature and slow down and be more considered, and that's just
Yes.
life. That's just growing through life. But no, I think generationally it is changing. I think it's changing for the better. I'm getting on in years now, and I've been around
Mhm.
the job for a while. I think I just sneak into millennial, just like by 1 year, if you look at
Okay.
the kind of. But so I'm kind of like borderline, right? But I so much more associate with a younger and progressive world than trying to continue to climb the corporate ladder, that was my father's world. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot more
And
of.
I think you're right. It's the DNA. When you said your father's world, it's the DNA of what white collar meant, who we had to be
Yep.
within that. And maybe it's a little easier if you come from this as I didn't, and I'm not certain you did, but who knows? I imagine there's people who grew up with, mama or papa was a CEO, and they're still struggling with this imposter thing, which
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
helps them, makes them present a different person. So I want to finish with a couple of things that I think are really important. Kind of a two-part question. The first part is about the self. What's your sense of, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I have been ditching really important parts of myself. What's your sense of how to take the first steps toward bringing more authenticity to the workplace?
Yeah. I think you've got to own who you
Yep.
are. And I think there are always things about ourselves that we can improve. So I think taking a very proactive, introspective look at who we are, what our traits are, what are our strengths, how does someone being slightly different or a little bit weird, how can we turn that into a
Yep.
positive? How can that just be a superpower of ours? How can we talk to things like neurodivergency as being a positive in the workplace as opposed to something to, try and live with or disguise or mask, right? And I also think that comes with identifying the areas that you can improve. I think it's all about looking inside and discovering what you're good at, working with coaches, working with folks that can give you honest and direct feedback, and working on the things where you definitely can make some improvements. None of us are perfect, but I think anchoring back to core beliefs, having a core belief system, having almost like a personal mission statement that you're anchored to in terms of the way that you live your life. I think setting healthy boundaries with that work-life integration that we spoke about earlier on, but flexible boundaries, especially if you work in sales. If end of quarter happens to be on a Sunday, you might have to, do a couple of calls to close that deal, get that contract signed on that Saturday,
Yep.
right? That's the life that we live in. But then knowing that we should be perfectly comfortable with a balance to that, and being flexible every single day, I think is really important. So I'm a big fan of personal boundaries, but those boundaries being flexible and mapping to the world that we're living
Yep.
in.
Yep.
Um,
I'm thinking back to my bio, standing on stage, speaking and being introduced. And my bio was all about um, DePaul, Kellogg, VP title at a Fortune 50, several books that I've authored. And I have to tell you, several years ago, I added the the beginning of my career being I labored for ironworkers, I drove a dump truck, and I wrenched on cars. I wasn't a mechanic, but I was like a number two. And I've added that now to my bio with the disclaimer that none of these skills are current. And so the reason I
Yes.
bring that up is like trying to find ways to weave in a little bit of who you are and balancing that out. I mean, for me, that was a simple way. How about as a leader? How what are your thoughts on encouraging those around us to let that come out a little bit?
Yeah. I think you've got to create a safe space for that to work. I think you've got to be intuitive as a leader, and you've got to be inquisitive. I think you've got to, feel, hear, understand, make it okay for someone to say, hey, I kind of grew up a little differently. My world was a little different growing up. And allowing someone to tell that story, I think is creating spaces for people to tell those stories, and really genuinely being enthusiastic. I always look for the positive in people, and I look back on experiences, whether somebody had an amazing childhood with all the money and the lifestyle and all of that. That's got positives in it. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
what you think about that. If somebody grows up, on the poorer side of town and struggle through life, you talk about the positives that come from that. Maybe there's a different style of grit. There's a different communication style. There's something else that they can bring to the table. I think just as a leader, you've got to embrace everybody's background, allow that background to exist, and not try and shut it down. And if you see someone trying to conform and not be themselves, like help them be themselves. I think allow them to come and tell that story. I'm a big fan, certainly in any role I've been in, is kind of asking myself 3 key questions, and I encourage people to do this as well. When we're thinking about the role that we're in right now, or the role that we want in the future, do I have fundamental job security? Is the company doing well? Is it performing well? Am I performing? Are we, hitting my targets? That kind of things. And number one, very basic job security. The next one is, do I have upside here? Can I still learn? Can I still grow? Is there financial upside? Can I continue to make more money this year than I did last year? All of those things. Is there upside for me being there? But the most important thing, and the biggest question that I've anchored to later on in my life, is, does working here make me happy? What kind of person am I when I work here? Is my family life good because I work here? When I walk out the door that's behind me and I'm straight into being a father, husband, am I a better person or a worse person for working in this role? Those are questions that I ask myself. But from a leadership perspective, what I like to do is think about every decision I make, every communication I have in that context. Is this going to make this person happier, better at home? Are they going to have a better work-life balance and integration? Do they see a future in them working here based on those 3 questions? And that's something I lean into as a leader to allow people to really express the fact that this decision that we're about to make, this communication that we're sending out, this new process, this new policy, it has an impact on the person as much as it does on the business. And I think that's something that as a leader we should take into account as well.
Yeah, I love this whole conversation. I really hope others do. I thought back to the last few subjects. It's been forecasting, emerging tech, and AI. It's been competitive enablement, and we do not spend enough time on the human side of enterprise sales, either as a seller or a leader. So I'm so glad that this concept sort of emerged as you and I were chatting last week. And I would encourage anybody who's interested. I wrote a book, I think called Poet and Warrior, and it's about balancing
Yep.
our personal and professional lives. And anybody who listens to this, just put a note in the comment section, and I'll just send you a PDF copy of the thing. I've never sold it. I wrote it, and it was a kind of a life's work. So it's there if people are interested in this subject and they want to do more. But you've been super generous with your time and your ideas, and this is a really important subject, and I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for having me on. I love talking about this, and people in any business, it's the lifeblood of any business. So I think leaning into that people side is so important. I love talking about it, and I'm just really grateful to be on the podcast today and talk to you about it.
Thanks, Matt.